Day 974 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 684,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,240 in the past day. Then as for hardware losses, a below average 2 tanks, 25 APVs, 45 artillery, 2 multiple launch rocket systems, plus 26 out of 12,000 North Korean soldiers. And that's even before they officially commenced their wartime roles and activities, and only what we know about. Though as for this type of stat, I'd be kidding myself to add it daily, as these elimination types already get subsumed by the broader daily tally. However, being the case that 2 nuclear states have gone to war with one non-nuclear state, driven by expansionist ideologies and aiming for the complete erosion of Ukraine's sovereignty, I do still expect that there would be several upcoming interesting and useful stats to explore from a North Korean perspective soon. Then headed to the map with 148 clashes recorded across the entire front line in the past day, and to take a look at the Pokrovsk direction, where this location of attack towards the main Russian objective has most recently come to show us a pair of Bradleys counterattacking near the Novorodrivka mine. But then also, really close to that location, we saw a couple of lonesome Russian infantry taking on small arms fire from the AFU, where they didn't appear to make it out to tell the tale. So given the location of these events, they're not even happening within the map's grey zones, but instead in Russian-controlled territory, or supposedly Russian-controlled territory. It's almost as if they're just token Russian forces here, because they all moved to Seladova in the south, which is somewhat of an accurate statement to say, because as for a follow-up to Russia's eastern push into the town yesterday, they since performed further operations to move 5 or 6 blocks beyond, where they hoisted a flag on the top of a high-rise from their southeastern direction of attack, close to the central part of Seladova but south to the Solana River, with the flag located at this set of coordinates, as their army was wasting no chances to get the first available high-rise leading into the center of the town. And it only cost them a reported 307 eliminations of their own personnel, and possibly double that for their Wounded Cargo 300 status. At least 3 companies worth here. Now for these engagements, around the same time we saw Ukrainian soldiers in a Ukrainian armoured Cossack infantry mobility vehicle advancing through the streets of Seladova under heavy enemy fire from small arms. And so when looking into this front a bit more deeply, almost every Russian source I can find that reports on these matters has stated that they've taken the town, and that there was a mass Ukrainian withdrawal and so on. But they publish this type of update almost every single day, and certainly multiple times a week, leading me to sift through a great deal of rubbish. As a result, I've been looking for more confirmations than just a high-rise, a single high-rise with a hoisted flag on top at the outer urban edge of the town, which they keep publishing, sometimes from different angles. So my highest hope here was for Russia to give me something more to work with if it truly is all captured, which is extremely unlikely to be the case. And although anything's possible, I'm somewhat reminded of the Russian claims of capturing Verkno-Kaminsky, Hernik, and Ryo-Rivka, where those false claims were only in the last 2 weeks. But as for now, I think we can contend that this town of Seladova, that I've often referred to as a headache for Russia over the past number of months, seems to show us that the Russian military command's apparent focus on the securing of the town has come at the expense of Russian forces' ability to sustain meaningful offensive drives directly against Pokrovsk itself, which is Russia's self-defined operational objective on this sector of the map. Then headed up north to Toretsk, the present day. The commander of a Russian assault in the town said that his soldiers can't even move across to the next building without copping the brunt of heavy counterfire from the AFU, He then also complained about the lack of evacuation in the regiment and criticized the leadership for setting impossible tasks just to please Vova Putin, with no changes recorded on the map at this area in the last day. Then we'll head all the way up to Kursk, where there's been mostly an odd bunch of activities here in the past day. Take, for example, Ukrainian FPV kamikazes destroyed Russian MTLBs, buggies, and a Russian BTR-82. That happening southeast of the village of Plakovo. There was also the zeroing in on another Russian BTR-82 armored personnel carrier in Kamarovka, meaning that accounts for some precision given that that's about 10 to 15 kilometers from the front contact point, depending on the direction of Ukrainian fire. Then we saw a bit more attitude coming out of a Russian-utilized Kursk hospital. Beyond these front lines, where a hospital volunteer said to one soldier, quote, "Don't worry, we'll fix your arms and your legs later, but for now, here's a whole lot of nothing." Which was a sarcastic take on the lack of real help soldiers are getting, even though they're fighting in the war, or a non-war, slight SMO border breach. I mean, honestly, how could Russia still not call this a war when another military is still actively on their own land after all of this time? Then also, some more Russian chevrons or patches were discovered by the AFU in this region, with one such example that included former Soviet Union territories with a Russian motto that translates to, "I'll take back what's mine." And yes, that territory on the east of the map is Alaska. So time and time again we see this shameless Russian expansionist mindset, where given the chance they'd capture not just Alaska if they could, but large swaths of Europe as well. Their appetite and mindset for expansion knows no bounds. So as long as we can all agree on that, even many Russian politicians would agree with that, with many in the recent past expressing that sort of sentiment. Then also in the Kursk region, we saw a Ukrainian-operated, Turkish-provided BMC Kirpi MRAP ravaged by a landmine. Well, that's a bit of an overstatement. After all, it found its way to a flatbed for some repairs, not to mention provided protection to spec for both the occupants and the vehicle. Then headed to Crimea somewhat briefly, where it seems there was a renewed uptick of explosions heard in the occupied peninsula. Multiple loud explosions were heard around the city of Sevastopol and the Baidar Valley and near Belbek around the military airfield, all of which commenced around 1:45 AM local time this morning. Then to move on with a further bit of activity happening outside of Ukraine, there was the case in Perm of Russia, where two unidentified women threw Molotov cocktails at Putin's United Russia Party office. Now, this type of event used to happen quite a bit regularly, but instead, within Russia, it was directed at the military enlistment or mobilization offices. But now, it looks like some of these Russians are striking much closer to the heart of the Kremlin and Putin, as they seem to recognize the source of their Russian problems now. Then to St. Petersburg, as partisans torched a railroad relay cabinet within Krasnoye Selo, keeping those trains from running. Then headed across to some news for today. So the 2024 BRICS summit in Russia's Kazan region wrapped up with discussions centered around reducing reliance on the US dollar and the euro by establishing alternative financial systems, including a potential BRICS currency, with Putin even taking a look at a mock-up design of a BRICS note. So the leaders from Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa explored ways to promote local currency transactions and reduce vulnerability to sanctions. However, despite these initiatives, these long-standing initiatives that continue to gain no traction for an untrustworthy global BRICS currency, which in this case had really showed the irony of the situation, as the summit transactions for fees and services were still conducted using none other than US dollars and euros, highlighting the ongoing practical dependence on these currencies in global trade. Then I'll head across to some North Korean news updates, as Ukraine's I Want to Live project, you might remember, initially launched in 2022 to help Russian soldiers safely surrender, has now expanded to target North Korean troops sent to fight alongside Russia. So yesterday, a Korean language video message was released urging North Korean soldiers to surrender, promising them food, shelter, medical care, and humane treatment under the Geneva Conventions, though I do question whether North Korean soldiers have anything much of an awareness of the Geneva Convention. And so the promotion of this hotline emphasized that surrendering to Ukraine would prevent senseless deaths on foreign soil, with at least. The first would be, this is better living conditions than they experience back home or even in Russia. Secondly, someone's got to make sure they've ever come across. Then headed across to a quick funny to round it all off today, guys. So here we see the new devastating Russian artillery weapon produced by the world's second army, as Russia's dire state of artillery systems puts on display their continued inability to gracefully give up and return home from the war. Because this latest example includes a stationary makeshift rocket artillery system they've commenced using in the field. Here we see the Russian artillerists load a single 122mm unguided Grad rocket, where in the long form of the video you see it takes them about 120 seconds to load each single one of them to fire off. No sights, no fine adjustments. So these unguided Grad rockets, or should I say this single Grad rocket, already has an atrocious accuracy, or CEP, a circular error probable, which is why they're meant to be fired off in a volley of up to 40 at a time. No saturation effect can be achieved here with a single rocket for this projectile medium. Huge vulnerabilities from no shoot and scoot capability, a reloading time frame that's worse than firing a field cannonball projectile from 2+ centuries ago. So what are you doing, Russia? Getting more shameless by the month. These guys have regressed hundreds of years. Good for them. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like, comment, subscribe, and the support. Thanks so much, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.